What's up, everybody, and welcome to Fantasy Football Today, DFS. My name is Sia Najad, and this is our quick sprint early look. And of course, we're bringing back Meg Shout. Meg, I butchered your name last time you were on, so I think I'm
You're
1
good.
for 1 today. How's it going?
You nailed it. Yeah, I'm doing well. Last week was not a great DFS week for me, so I'm looking to get right back into it and bounce back here.
No, me neither, to be honest with you. I had a losing week. That's 2 weeks in a row now. I've had a losing week. Now, I think I hit my cash games. I didn't play that many, but there's that. But listen, you're going to have losing weeks in DFS. That's just the reality of the situation.
Yep.
Sometimes you go big, like Mike McClure went big with the Joe Burrow. Meg, you probably watched the game by game preview. He went big with the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase stack, and it made sense. But of course, it completely crashed and burned. But again, that was a low ownership, sort of high leverage play. And those are things that happen in DFS. You do want to look at your sample size over 4, 5, maybe even 8, 10 weeks before you start to change your process. So happy with our process. The results, I have a funny lineup to show, by the way. At the end of the show, we're going to show the FFT DFS winner, of course. We're going to show one of my lineups that cashed, one of my tournament lineups. And it was a Justin Fields lineup. And the only reason I went there was because I had gone to him the week before in a big way, which I explained on the Tuesday show. And I was like, well, I at least have to have a couple of lineups. If I liked last week's matchup for Justin Fields, he's playing Denver this week. I got to at least so that lineup should have taken off, but some of my other plays weren't very good, admittedly. So we'll take a look at those. But, I was a little intimidated, if I'm being honest, by last week because I thought there were so many different games you can play. This week, I think it's a little bit more streamlined. Before we get into some of the high totals, Meg, I do want to tell everybody that the FFT DFS contest, it's already live. It's in the YouTube description. It might even be in the chat description. And I certainly tweeted it out yesterday, and I'll tweet it out again today. It actually filled up pretty fast last week, which is a great thing. Maybe we can start to expand this, maybe get a lower rake, maybe no rake eventually. So the faster we fill this up, the more likely it is we can ask for those things from DraftKings. The other note is, we've got another London game, so keep that in mind. In our game-by-game preview, I made a mistake initially of not even noting that Atlanta Jaguars game. So Jaguars play the Bills. That's in London, 9:30 a.m. Saturday. It's not a part of the main slate. Also, we have 4 teams on a bye: Browns, Chargers, Seahawks, and Bucks. Just for the record, next week, there's only 2 teams on a bye, the Packers and the Steelers. But again, Browns, Chargers, Seahawks, Bucks, they are on a bye this week. The high totals, Meg, I'm gonna list them real quick.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask you maybe your 2 favorite of these.
Sure.
So we've got the Panthers at the Lions. It's a 45-point total, so it's not extremely high, but, it's relatively high because there's a lot of low totals this week. Eagles, Rams, that's a 50-point total, 4.5-point spread. Chiefs, Vikings, 52.5-point total. Giants, Dolphins, 49.5. If you had to pick 2 of those 4, what would be the 2 you'd be maybe leaning toward on a Tuesday?
Yeah, on a Tuesday where I see pushback on both sides, because there's 2 of those games where I like one side, but where I see pushback on both sides is Chiefs, Vikings, and Eagles, Rams are the 2 that I'm circling as like, oh, this could shoot out both sides. And I would like both sides to that game.
Absolutely. I totally agree. It's hard. It's hard. The Giants Dolphins game, it's like, who's the bring back there, because it's just the Giants are dreadful. Saquon probably doesn't play. And even if he does play, is he getting a full complement? Is he fully healthy? Is he forcing himself back a little too early? I do think because I don't want to forget this later in the show. I had 2 props yesterday. One was very unfortunate because it was a Geno Smith completions prop of 22.5. Yeah. And that didn't work out because he missed the entire second quarter and then the game got away from them. He had 9 completions with 10 minutes left in the second quarter. So that was going to cruise to victory. But the other prop I had was Wan'Dale Robinson over 18.5 receiving yards. And he smashed that in the first quarter. That wasn't even close.
Nice.
He's 3,000 on this slate. So if you just you don't have to bring anybody back in some of these games. The run back isn't mandatory. But if you were to stack Tua or you had A-Chain or whatever, Tyreek Hill, and you wanted to have somebody on the other side, the run back in this case with Wan'Dale Robinson, it's not really to have a run back as much as it would be for salary relief. At 3,000, I mean, it's like, all right, I'll take him. He's probably going to get 4 to 5 targets in a negative game script minimum. He's been catching a lot of them. He's got short area targets. They're, those are the more comfortable ones to swallow because obviously, they're going to be easier to catch. But it's just something to consider because in the Dolphins game, it's hard to imagine bringing anybody back. I think A-Chain is really interesting and maybe Mostert in a blowout.
Right.
But Meg, let's talk about quarterbacks. So Nada's going to bring up the quarterback list here. And I need your help here because There are so many quarterbacks, particularly at the top. I have a few that are my favorite. I'm going to give my 3 favorite on the slate so far. But if you look at the top here, it is hard. It is really difficult to be like, well, I don't love any of these quarterbacks at the top. Patrick Mahomes at Minnesota, that's easy. Jalen Hurts at the Rams in a shootout. Lamar Jackson, I mean, honestly, against Pittsburgh, that defense is starting to get really banged up. I don't hate that play either, especially if Mark Andrews is going to be cheap like he was last week. Tua at 7,100 makes sense. Anthony Richardson makes sense. Kirk Cousins in a shootout makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And even Jared Goff, if you wanted to do that.
Right.
I like all of these guys.
I know.
Do you have, like, it sounds to me like you like, we talked about some of the games you like, that Philly game, that Kansas City game. In terms of just looking at these quarterbacks, is it Mahomes and Hurts that are your favorite here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a week, I agree, where it is like, oh, geez, the top options are really the most attractive options for sure, both of just the game environment and just their potential ceiling. So, yeah, I would say Mahomes, Hurts, but I also really like Cousins because he wasn't pushed last week, right? In that game against Carolina, there was, I think defensive touchdowns that really kind of made that screwy. I think he only threw the ball less than 20 times. But when Kirk Cousins is pushed and they do have a high pass rate, he should be pushed against Mahomes and the Chiefs. So that would be an instance where I say, oh, maybe I'll save a little money and go down to Cousins and still be able to get some, Chiefs pieces on the bring back.
Yeah, Cousins is so interesting because, and I hate to do this sometimes, but like Zach Wilson was kind of carving up the Chiefs. Let's just be honest about what happened a couple nights ago. So, I mean, that doesn't mean Cousins is going to carve up the Chiefs, but there is a sample size of this Chiefs defense over 4 weeks being like quite vulnerable. We saw it in the Detroit game opening night as well. So, I think Cousins is a pretty good value. Obviously, you can pair him with Justin Jefferson, but the cool thing is you can also pair him with Jordan Addison or go down to KJ Osborne or TJ Hawkinson, who's a little expensive this week. But there's so many ways to play that game. I think the problem there for me is the bring back. Do you pay up for Travis Kelce?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that's the best option, but it seems to be the only option. Like, Meg, let me ask you, when it comes to the Chiefs, obviously you have Travis Kelce, but then Noah Gray's getting some looks and he's super cheap. He's 2,800, by the way. But then you got Rashee Rice, you got Kadarius Toney, you got Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Like, it's like, who do we play? Sky Moore. The Sky Moore bros are definitely still out there, Meg. I promise you. I think Sky Moore and Rashee Rice might be, and we'll get to receivers. They might be maybe the ones I like the most out of the receiver crew. Is there anybody you like from a receiver standpoint for the Kansas City Chiefs?
I think we're going to be doing this all season long with the Chiefs. Like, outside of Kelce, who's the right receiver to stack? And I think it's always going to be tough because I think it might oscillate week to week. Yeah. And, it's going to be hard for that to be predictive. I just go to Rice because he's one of the cheapest that I think, runs those short intermediate routes that, maybe he can get there. So as far as like stacking, we'll get to running backs in a minute. As far as like stacking with Mahomes, yeah, for me, it's probably Kelce. And if it's not, I'd say Rice. You make a great point about Noah Gray, but I think then I would just go to the cheapest receiving option because again, we're going to have to save salary places. So I think that would be it for me. And I just think the Chiefs are going to be very difficult outside of Kelce. They were last year. They're going to be this year too.
Yeah, shout out to the chat, by the way. Chef TPTV says Kadarius Phony, which honestly is like kind of sophomoric, but it's also very funny. And I've never heard anybody say that before.
That's pretty funny. I hadn't heard that one either.
So props to you. By the way, Chef, I see you, Renegade Envy. He says, drop Daniel Jones. Yeah, I don't hate it. Eric David's in here. By the way, shout out to Eric David. His son, Max, it's his 17th birthday. If you all could hit the like button. And by the way, we have Meg on this show a lot now. If you like Meg, go ahead and not only, you're all subscribers to this podcast, I'm sure, but go ahead and write a review. Say, hey, I like Mike McClure. I like Sia, but Meg's pretty cool too. Give us 5 stars. That listen, it genuinely helps. And honestly, like, I'm not gonna lie, it just makes us feel good that people are watching and they're taking the time, which by the way, it literally takes 5 seconds to hit 5 stars and like write like one line, like, hey, great podcast. It's part of my repertoire or whatever. By the way, oscillate. I see you, Meg. I see you, SAT words. All right, real quick on quarterbacks, because this is a quick hitter podcast. We got to move on. But my favorites of those top tier, it's Jalen Hurts, it's Tua, and it's Cousins, Meg. But if there's some like gross quarterbacks to play, by gross, I mean maybe some of the lower salaried, maybe in that, well, we mentioned Jared Goff. I'm curious, do you like him? And is there anybody in the low range that you love?
Well, I always love Jared Goff. Based on if you looked at my best ball exposure, you'll know I always love Jared Goff, especially in a dome. At home, again, the only problem there is I'm worried about pushback because Detroit has shown, like they did against the Packers Thursday night, if they're not getting that pushback, they'll just run the ball. So I'm worried about the pushback there for Goff. However, I do like him. If for some reason there was some kind of fluky, like Carolina defensive touchdown or Carolina jumped out to a lead, then yes, I'm going to like Goff at home. But we don't really know that. So as much as I love Goff at home, I don't know that I'll get there. I've got a real gross one for you. And it's a guy you kind of mentioned against the Chiefs defense the other night. Never did I think I'd be recommending Zach Wilson in week 5. You go to like, you go to some like, further down plays further in the season when injuries are involved and that kind of stuff. But week 5, I didn't think I'd get this gross this soon. But there's a couple reasons for it. Obviously, it doesn't look like there's going to be a trade to, replace Zach Wilson, quite honestly, at least not on the horizon. It looks like Aaron Rodgers told Melissa Stark he wants to be back for the playoffs. He wants to will this team, the defense, and Zach Wilson to manage this team to get them to the playoffs, and he'll come back. That's what it sounds like. So I think they're rolling with Zach Wilson. I think he showed a little something the other night. And also, you got 2 other things at play. Denver, one of the worst defenses through 4 weeks. We want to circle them to target as a defense to target both pass and run. So like that there for a spot for Zach Wilson. And also Narrative Street. Sean Payton made some comments about offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett. I think that I love a good Narrative Street. I think that Aaron Rodgers is in Zach Wilson's ear. I think Hackett will want to pile it on if they have the opportunity to. And so if there's ever a get right spot for the Jets and Zach Wilson in this offense, it's this Broncos game. And so I'm circling that, and he's 4,900. So
yeah, and you can double stack him if you want. Like throw Garrett Wilson in there and Tyler Conklin, who gets plenty of looks. His receiving prop, which I took, I wish I put this on the record. It was 25.5 receiving yards. He sailed over that. So I mean, I just like if you're trying to again find salary relief and you think that game might shoot out, Zach Wilson's probably going to have to support a couple of receivers for him. Well, he's going to pay off at 4,900 just supporting one. But another gross one, Ryan Tannehill at 4,900. Like a Ryan Tannehill D-Hop or Ryan Tannehill Okonkwo. It's a decent matchup at Indianapolis. So that's something to think about as well if you just kind of want to get gross. By the way, there was a funny comment. Smoke TNT says, I have Darren Waller. Should I bother even starting a tight end? That's amazing. That's an amazing comment. All right, we gotta roar through running backs and wide receivers. But before we do that, let's hear a word from our partners.
We need the sports news anywhere.
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
By the way, Lori Moore says, and she's a fan of the early edge. I know Lori. She said, I personally love watching another woman talking DFS. Welcome, Meg. Lori, we love that too. So thank you for your support of the show and of Meg. Let's support some running backs here. So we have Saquon Barkley listed as out, which certainly might be the case. I'm not going to play him regardless against Miami. But Bijan Robinson is interesting at 7,700. He's certainly getting the looks through the running game and the passing game. I don't think this Houston defense is going to intimidate Atlanta at all. And I think, they need the win. I think Bijan is going to be the dude. So him, Derrick Henry at the top. I certainly like both of those. If I had to lean one way or the other, Meg, it would probably be to Bijan, otherwise known as Bijan, which is how apparently you're supposed to say it. David Montgomery, that's easy to say. At 6,600, he makes so much sense at home. You said it yourself, probably securing a big lead, which is probably why you're at least a little shy to play Jared Goff. But if that's the case, if they are supporting a lead or if it's a neutral game script, we know they just run David Montgomery into the ground, and he loves every minute of it because he's scoring touchdowns and he's eating up yards. So I like those guys up top. I think A-Chain is going to be really chalky at 6,100. That's the one I prefer to play over Raheem Mostert, who's kind of trending downward with some fumbles, and the production's certainly not as good as A-Chain as of late. In this sort of top tier, whether it's 6,000 or 7,000 range, anybody you're in love with here?
Well, I kind of alluded to it in the Chiefs stack. I think Pacheco. Well, Pacheco's right under 6,000.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Go ahead.
So,
Pacheco, yeah.
So I'll go Pacheco now. I do like Pacheco in that game. If you feel like you're doing a cousin stack and you can't really afford Kelsey and you don't want to try to play a dart throw on the Chiefs receivers, I don't mind Pacheco. I mean, another guy who looked great on Sunday night. And, you can run on the Vikings too. So I think Pacheco is definitely viable there. I'm with you. I really love the Dolphins running backs. I think a chain is the one I'll go to most, but if I'm really trying to get some ownership leverage, maybe it is another game where both Dolphins running backs get there. It certainly, I think, lays out the game script for that. So those Dolphins running backs and Pacheco and Montgomery are probably my favorites in that range.
Between Derrick Henry and Bijan Robinson, are you probably playing neither of them, or is there one of those two that you really like?
Between the two, I'd probably lean. Oh, this is tough. I'd probably, honestly, I don't have a strong lean and I don't see myself. I like them both, but I don't see myself getting up there in my builds because I do want to stack the passing games of the games that we talked about targeting of the Chiefs, Vikings, and the Eagles, Rams, those kind of game environments. So, or getting Garrett Wilson, who we'll talk to in a minute, who I just talked about, Zach Wilson. So I just don't see myself being able to get up to those guys much. I think both are very viable though. So I don't have a strong lean either way on them. I don't think they're viable, or I think they're viable. I don't think I'll get to them a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think I'll be over the field on Bijan Robinson. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to Derrick Henry, but I do agree with your sentiment. And that's what Mike McClure does a lot too. He's stacking the high-end receivers in the high-end stacks, and he usually pays down at running back. Let's go down before we get to receiver. Let's go down to that 5,200, that 4,500 range. We'll stop at 5,200 because a couple of guys I think are interesting. Miles Sanders at 5,200 at Detroit. I don't like Miles Sanders. Haven't played him all year. I don't really understand what the buzz is about him, but I'm starting to think that by the way, that's a decent price for Miles Sanders. He catches passes, he gets some rushing attempts, but let's monitor what happens with practice this week, because I think Chuba Hubbard at 4,500 might be in play here because he's getting almost as much work as Miles Sanders, and he's just a much cheaper price. So if you're trying to have some salary relief here, I think Chuba Hubbard at 4,500 at Detroit in a negative game script, he'll still be used. So that's somebody that is interesting to me. If we scroll up a little bit, there is somebody that I scroll up a little bit more, Jerick McKinnon at 4,900. If you want a piece of that Chiefs game and you want to try to get tricky, I think he's okay. McLaughlin at 5,000. Listen, it's not a good matchup, but we know that Javonte Williams is not going to play. And I think McLaughlin is just more explosive than Samaje Perine. So probably a dart Meg I'm not throwing, but any of those guys that I mentioned before we move on to wide receiver, whether it's Miles Sanders or Chuba Hubbard or McLaughlin or even McKinnon, anybody down there that you like?
Yeah, I think all those are good, considerations. My favorite is probably still Miles Sanders. I mean, they gave him a decent contract, so I would think they're going to stick with him for, a little longer, even though the efficiency hasn't been great. And last week he only got a handful of targets, but he was getting a good amount of targets. So if we think it's a negative game script and he goes back to getting 5+ targets a game at 5,200, that's really attractive. And he's still got a decent amount of carries. Like you said, I know Hubbard got more, but if he could still get a decent share of the carries and 5+ targets at that price, I'm interested in a negative game script there. And then the only other one I'll mention is Gus Edwards. Lamar has run it in for touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, 2 weeks in a row. I don't know that we're going to get 2 rushing touchdowns from Lamar Jackson every week. And if we don't, at 5,000, I think you're getting 12 to 15+ touches from Edwards. That's pretty attractive at 5,000.
Yeah, no, I like that. And obviously from a running back standpoint, we'll see some of this value open up as the week progresses, and we'll certainly address it in our game by game preview.
Someone just mentioned Breece Hall, and I just mentioned I got on the whole Jets passing game, but that's interesting. I mean, when will they start ramping him up is the question, but at his price of 5,400, that is interesting if you want to approach attacking Denver that way.
That is a great call out. It could be a big game for Breece Hall at 5,400 against that rush defense. It makes a ton of sense. And honestly, probably a pretty chalky play. I know Dalvin Cook also occupies that backfield in some touches, but it could be a Breece Hall game for sure there. So I absolutely love that. Let's take a look at receivers real quick, and we'll race through this. Fortunately, the way we do this show, it's always just going to be a 30-minute show, and we try to address some of the receivers with the quarterbacks. So when we were talking about stacking, for example, obviously Justin Jefferson is in play in a Cousins stack, which we already addressed. Tyreek Hill, Yeah, I always like him. I just wonder if this is the game script for him. Maybe this is the game where you're just off Tyreek Hill and you're on one of those two running backs, probably A-Chain. I'm curious to see what Mike McClure thinks about that. A.J. Brown is always in play, especially in a shootout. I'm off Jamar Chase. I'm probably off Amon-Ra St. Brown, but the price is right for Amon-Ra St. Brown, so I don't hate that at all. Puka Nacua is always in play, again, in a shootout. We saw that Philadelphia Eagles secondary is absolutely vulnerable, especially in the middle of the field where Nacua likes to work. Not more often than not necessarily, but certainly he's in the middle of the field. This top tier, Meg, who we liking?
I'm with you. I'm going to go Jefferson at the very top because, again, game environment, all part of the stack. And I really then, outside of that, underneath like A.J. Brown, probably still Amon-Ra for the targets I'm interested in, and Puka Nacua in that same game. Up top, those are the ones I'm focused on. And as you can see, it's a lot of those are related to the games that I want to target too.
So I'm going to list off some receivers in the middle and lower tier, Meg, real quick that I like. And then maybe you mention a few receivers in those tiers that you like, whichever ones you want to pick out. I mean, once we get down to like the mid 7K range, obviously Devontae Smith is in play at 7,400. Right. Nico Collins hasn't been priced up enough. He's 5,600. Tutu Atwell, again, in a good game environment at 5,300. I already mentioned Jordan Addison. I like him. Adam Thielen is certainly in play in a potential shootout. If that game is really a back and forth, which we hope it will be, guys like Thielen, DJ Shark are obviously in play. Tank Dell at 4,800 in play. Tyler Boyd, now that T. Higgins is out. Listen, I hate the Cincinnati offense, but Tyler Boyd's only 4,500. It's something to consider at least. Sky Moore, we already talked about when we talked about quarterbacks. He's only 4,400. Rashee Rice, 3,600. Just like Meg, that's probably the risk I'm going to take. I'm probably going to go down to Rashee if I'm stacking that game in any way, shape, or form. Calvin Austin, again, cheap, 3,500. If he catches a long ball, he pays off. Those are some of the receivers that I saw. Meg, if you had, let's say, 90 seconds to address receivers, where are we going for some value or just some guys you like?
Yeah, I like a lot of the mid-range guys that you mentioned. With these Houston receivers, I like them, but they seem to kind of oscillate, ping pong back and forth. Don't know which one is going to be there, if it's going to be a Nico or Tank Dell week, but I like both of them. Love Addison for a little cheaper. Love Rashee Rice. And then obviously I'll bring back the whole Garrett Wilson thing at 6,000, stacking him with Zach Wilson or just plain Garrett Wilson in this incredible matchup. A little lower, I like Josh Reynolds. Potentially, I doubt they're going to ramp up Jamison Williams to any sort of high level this week. So at 4,200, Josh Reynolds has looked great so far. And then one last cheap one, Michael Wilson at 3.7K for the Cardinals as their number 2 receiver, gain a good amount of targets.
Cool. I like all of those picks. I think these are great picks. And we know that some value is going to open up as the week goes as well. We're going to address a question in the chat. Then we're going to just touch on our lineups. Maybe we'll mention a couple of tight ends. We only have a few minutes to do it. But before we do any of that, let's hear one more word from our partners. So the question is, he says, dumb question. It's not a dumb question. How many contrarian picks make sense in a heavy chalk lineup? So the answer to that is just a couple, frankly. I mean, if you can get a couple picks at really low ownership in a chalky line, by low ownership, I'm talking like sub 5%, and they pay off like that. That is going to carry a chalky lineup past a lot of other lineups. So you're generally looking at total ownership as opposed to like how many chalky people do I have. And if your total ownership is low because you have a couple guys that are below 5% or like 2% range and they take off, then your lineup is going to pass a lot of those so-called chalky lineups. Meg, I'm going to address tight end super quick, and then I'll just get like maybe a couple comments from you, and then we'll go recapping 2 lineups real quick. But obviously Kelsey's in play at 7,600. No surprise there. Noah Gray at 2,800 I think is super sneaky, maybe in place of Travis Kelce if you're trying to get a cheap piece of that game, maybe in a Mahomes stack. TJ Hawkinson's in play. He's kind of expensive. Andrews, Laporta, of course. I think Goddard, it could be a Goddard week at 4,200. Kyle Pitts is only 3,300, but a really quick call out. Johnny Smith has out-targeted and out-caught Kyle Pitts in a very big way. Johnny has caught 15 of 20 targets over his last 3 games, and he's only 2,800. I always kind of like to throw a dart at Granson and Smythe, so they're in that 3K range. I like them. Any tight ends that you like other than what I brought up, or is there any tight end I brought up that you love?
Well, obviously love Kelsey, love the Jonnu Smith call. And the last one I'll mention, I mean, I'm a huge Laporta fan, so probably will play a little bit of him if I can. The last one I'll mention, if Freiermuth is out, watch the Pittsburgh tight end situation. Maybe Darnell Washington at total min price.
Yeah, I love that. Listen, we always want salary relief with the tight end that we think can catch three or four balls. So that always makes sense. Hudson was one of those guys last week when Irv Smith wasn't playing. All right, let's bring up the FFT DFS winner again. This contest, this link is live, so you guys can register right now. It's actually in the chat description. I should say the chat right now, the link for it, but it's going to be in the YouTube and the podcast description. Let's fill this up fast. So our winner, it is Druid27, Jalen Hurts. That's pretty good. AJ Brown, that's pretty good. What a stack there. And he also had DeAndre Swift in that lineup. So he just thought Philly was going to score a ton on Washington. Well, guess what? He was right. DeAndre Swift, I thought, was a great play. Probably should have paid off a little bit more than he did. Josh Jacobs, a great play at 7,100. We thought this could be a good kind of contrarian play with Josh Jacobs. Puka Nacua, can't go wrong there. Marvin Mims, salary relief didn't pay off, but it really didn't hurt him either. Okonkwo didn't really hurt him, but certainly didn't pay off. And Quentin Johnson, I actually flat out did not like that play. But again, he was really cheap, and he allowed this lineup to stack Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and still get Puka Nacua, Josh Jacobs. And oh, by the way, that Cowboys defense. Oh, dear. Wow, what a play. This is a very good lineup. He went more expensive on his defense, and that really paid off. And that's going to happen sometimes. It's not always the cheap defense. So good job, Druid27. Let's look at one of my tournament lineups just for fun. I mean, this is nothing impressive, by the way. I'm not showing you something that's like, oh, wow, check this out. Like, I'm so good at fantasy football, daily fantasy football. But again, this was kind of a down week for me. But I just wanted to just harken back just from a process standpoint. I liked Justin Fields a week ago. I told you I played him in my afternoon lineups, and it was terrible. He was so bad. But if I liked him that week, and I have an even better matchup in the following week, I feel like I have to play him a little bit. And that goes for all DFS, whether you play golf DFS or anything else. So I had Justin Fields to DJ Moore. What's really sad about this is I had Cole Kmet in those lineups from 2 weeks ago, but I didn't put him in here. So that's bad on me because this lineup would have really taken off with Cole Kmet. But I have Joshua Kelly. Listen, I'm looking for leverage in that game because I didn't play a lot of it. So I'm trying to get basically leverage on everybody who's playing Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert. So I thought Joshua Kelly might be the play since I didn't have any shares of that game. Same thing with James Cook. I didn't have shares of that game. So I'm hoping it's the running game instead of Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, to Tyreek Hill, A-Chain. Well, I was wrong there too. Somehow this lineup cashed because Justin Fields went off. Tank Dell didn't even have a good game. Ertz didn't have a good game, but I did have Christian McCaffrey. So this kind of goes to show if you have the right stack and one other player that goes off, you can still cash even in tournaments, but especially in cash games. This was a tournament lineup, but I'm just telling you, these cash game lineups, they are still live. They are still soft, and you can absolutely still cash fairly easily in cash games. On Friday, I'll try to make sure I point out some cash game viable options so that you guys can make sure you mix it up there too. Meg, we've got 30 seconds left. Any final thoughts?
No, I think this slate, I feel, I hope I can bounce back this week. And I don't know, me touting Zach Wilson, Garrett Wilson stacks on Tuesday is going to be the way to do it, but that's how I'm starting my week. We'll see how I finish. So, no, this was fun. I love breaking this down with you, Sia, and good luck to everybody as the week goes on.
Let's bounce back. This is Fantasy Football Today DFS. We'll see you on Friday for our game-by-game